Good afternoon. We are ready to continue the work that we've been doing in Chapter 5 on interest rates. Let me remind you of what we're trying to do, what we've already done. We said we're interested in why interest rates in general change, why they sometimes go up, sometimes go down. We've said that we can look at the interest rate as being a reflection of the price of bonds. When interest rates go up, we know that the price of bonds is going down, and vice versa. So if we can understand what causes bond prices to change, then we can understand what causes interest rates to change. When we think about what causes a change in the price of something, we already have a conceptual framework for thinking about that. Prices are determined by supply and demand. So if we want to understand what can change the price of bonds, then we simply need to understand what can shift the demand curve for bonds and what can shift the supply curve for bonds. In thinking about interest rates, I think it's very important to recognize that interest rates are not simply set arbitrarily by banks or by other lenders or even by the government. Okay? Think of and it's easy to think of interest rates as being set by those entities, because if you go into the bank, they will tell you what the interest rate on your loan is, and they do have some discretion over what to charge you. But what we want to recognize is that the overall level of interest rates are impacted by things happening in the economy, which will tend to push rates up or down. And so the interest rate is a reflection of things going on in the economy that you are not easily observed. Think of the interest rate as kind of like the temperature reading on a thermometer. Someone can't simply announce that, well, the temperature is going to be 100 degrees today. I'm just going to make it that. No, the temperature is the result of movements of air through the region. And the temperature you see on the thermometer, that's simply reflecting these unseen forces that are pushing the temperature up or down. Think about the interest rate as being like that. There are things going on in the economy that are affecting the supply of bonds, the demand for bonds. They're pushing bond prices up or down, and changes in interest rates are reflecting those changes that are going on that you may not be aware of. We talked about what can shift the demand for bonds. We said wealth, expected return, risk, liquidity. Those are the primary shift factors for bonds. We talked about what can shift the supply of bonds, the expected profitability of investments, expected inflation, and government activities in regard to the budget deficit or surplus. And we saw in class that we can use our framework, our bond framework, to help us understand why interest rates behave the way they do in regard to events such as the economy going into recession or the economy improving and going into a boom, a period of rapid growth. We can use the framework to see how changes in expected inflation and other things impact interest rates. Toward the end of class last time, we began to talk about the second framework for thinking about movements in interest rates. So this is called the liquidity preference framework, developed by John Maynard Keynes. Starts with the assumption that at any point in time people have some given amount of wealth, and the simplifying assumption is that there are only two ways to hold that wealth. You can hold it in the form of money, which does not provide you with interest, or you can hold it in the form of bonds, which do provide interest. Now, we know Keynes knew that there are other ways to hold your wealth, but this is a simplifying assumption. It gives us a model that gives us a relatively simple way to think about interest rates, but it leaves out a lot of the complexity of the real world that isn't relevant for our purpose at hand. It just makes it more complicated to think through. So this is an interesting, a useful model to understand. It'll give you some, you might say, a different perspective than the bond market, our bond framework does. We started last time by pointing out that the wealth available at a certain point in time, we can represent that as the quantity of bonds supplied plus the quantity of money supplied, or we can represent it as the quantity of bonds demanded plus the quantity of money demanded. Okay? This represents wealth, this represents wealth, so they must be equal. If we simply rearrange by subtracting quantity of bonds demanded from both sides, subtracting quantity of money supplied from both sides, we get quantity of bonds supplied minus quantity of bonds demanded will equal quantity of money demanded minus the quantity of money supplied. Okay? Why is that? Why is that equation useful? Okay? Think about what it's telling us. Bonds supplied minus bonds demanded. That's telling you whether we're in equilibrium or whether we have an excess supply or excess demand in that market. This is telling you the same type of information about the money market. Three important implications here, which I pointed out a little bit last time, but I want to review and extend. If the quantity of bonds demanded and the quantity of bonds supplied, if they're equal, then this difference will be 0. And if this side is 0, then this side must be 0 as well. Why is that important? Because if that difference is equal to 0, that means that the bond market is in equilibrium. And since 0 on the left implies 0 on the right, that means that this is 0, it must be 0. If the bond market is in equilibrium, then that means that this difference is 0. That means that the money market is in equilibrium. We have a system of markets here, and we're seeing that if we know we're in equilibrium in one, that implies that we must be in equilibrium in the other. It also implies something about what is true if we're not in equilibrium. Okay? If quantity of bonds supplied is greater than quantity of bonds demanded, what do we call it when supply is greater than quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded? That's a surplus. If this is positive, this must be positive. Okay? But here, this side being positive means that you have a surplus in the bond market. But for this side to be positive means that quantity demanded of money is greater than the quantity demanded of, or quantity supplied of money. So that would mean you have a shortage in the money market. Okay. here we said if we're in equilibrium in the bond market, we must be in equilibrium in the money market. Now we're saying if we're not in equilibrium and we have a surplus in the bond market, that implies we must have the opposite in the money market. There must be a shortage in the money market. On the other hand, if the opposite were true, if quantity bonds demanded was greater than the quantity supplied, then this side would be negative. We would have a shortage in the bond market. This side would be negative as well, but that would mean the money being supplied was greater than the quantity being demanded, and so that would be a surplus in the money market. So if we have a surplus in the bond market, it implies a shortage in the money market. If we have a shortage in the bond market, it implies a surplus in the money market. Do you see that we can look at either of these markets and know what the situation is in the other market? So we can focus our attention on either one and be able to make predictions about what is going to happen in the other market. This is going to be very important in this liquidity preference model.